Good morning again, everybody. It's great to be here. I had the privilege of playing a house concert last night here in Manhattan, and that was really fabulous. They live up on the lake, and there's this beautiful view of the lake. And I got there in time to see the sun going down, so the sun was shining on the opposite shore, and it was dark on the side where we were. So it was this beautiful view, and that was the backdrop for the concert. Unfortunately, it gets dark very early, so the audience didn't get to experience that, but it was a really, really fabulous, wonderful host, and a couple of folks from here were there, so that really made me feel right at home. So today, we're going to talk a bit about the breath of God. So I tried to choose songs that kind of pointed to that direction about feeling that experience within us. And when I was here last time, we spoke about the presence of God and recognizing that that's both within us and outside of us and everywhere in creation all at the same time. So I wanted to kind of move with that a little bit further today and talk about how the breath can be a way for us to experience that, to bring God into our bodies. And if you think about the word inspiration, it actually means to breathe in. But when you take it apart, it's the taking in of spirit. So we'll talk a little bit about how that is connected to creativity. When we think of inspiration, we think of, being filled with a creative power, and how literally that's what's happening, is that we're taking in this breath of God. So when we can feel that in our bodies, we have this experience of this deep presence every time we breathe. So when we learn to breathe more consciously, then we have this ability to kind of instantly become aware of this presence. So I'd like to start today by inviting everybody just to close their eyes for a second and take 3 deep breaths. And I'm just going to leave you to that for a moment. So I don't know how that was for all of you, but I know when I do that, things start to shift pretty dramatically. And I've actually been working with a spiritual director, getting some guidance in meditation and in life in general. And I began a seated meditation practice probably about a year ago. I've had many other types of meditative practices, but actually doing a seated meditation practice I began about a year ago. And recently, some things have shifted in my schedule, and I found myself not doing that first thing in the morning. And I think, oh, I can do that. I'll do that later. But then later I'm tired, or later somebody calls, or who knows, something happens. So I had gotten away from that practice. And I was talking with her about this, and it was quite interesting. She was saying that, in fact, when you have an established practice of some kind that's important to you and you step away from it, you recognize that it's missing, and that is actually part of the practice. So even when you're not practicing, it's part of the practice. So that was reassuring, but she was also saying that it is very important, actually, to do this practice, and that if, for some reason, you really aren't able to, what you can do is just take 3 deep breaths. So I've been practicing this a lot lately, and I've been really surprised by how dramatically things shift within me when I do that. A lot of stuff starts to just fall by the wayside, and I come back to a very kind of peaceful, much more connected place. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So in almost every spiritual tradition, there's a lot of focus on breath. And in the Judeo-Christian tradition, of course, you have, in the very beginning, in Genesis 2:7, God breathes life into man, and he becomes a living being out of dust. So metaphorical or not, there's this very important concept of breath. And of course, you have the whole idea of the Holy Spirit, Holy Ghost, which is breath or wind, and the wind or breath coming over the water and calming the waters, which is representative of the whole world. So it's very, very present, certainly in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And I found this wonderful prayer a Native American prayer from Chief Yellow Lark, who's Lakota, that says, "O great spirit, whose voice I hear in the winds and whose breath gives life to all the world, hear me." So we find it in the Native American tradition for sure. Of course, in a lot of Eastern meditation traditions, there's this focusing on the breath as a way to meditate. So very, very prevalent there. It's referred to in the Vedas and the Upanishads, which are ancient sacred texts from India. In the Rig Veda, it says, "The one breath that breathed without breath." So this breath representing this omnipresence and this supreme kind of energy that's throughout everything. And one of my favorite yoga instructors is Rodney Yee, and he explains that it is said that the body represents the past. We carry all of our experiences in the memories of our cells. The mind represents the future because we're constantly thinking about what's going to come, what's happening next, planning for some future event. But the breath brings us into the present, uniting body and mind. So that's also a really beautiful way to think about it. And there's also in Indian philosophy a lot of focus on what's called prana. So prana is basically the life force, and it's carried on the breath. So it is not the breath itself, but it's carried on the breath. And I wanted to read this one passage from this book, which I really love, called Meditation as Medicine. This is the book here. And I always try to, whatever books I use to inspire my talk or do research for the talk, I try to have them on the back table. I have a few up here, but when I get done, I'll take them back there. And there's already a couple back there that I'm not using as for quotes, but that I did refer to. So feel free to look through those books. So this word prana is derived from the Sanskrit word meaning absolute energy. Prana is the principal element, the vital force that distinguishes living entities from inanimate objects. The sage Vivekananda eloquently defined prana as a manifestation of the universal power, indefinite and omnipresent. According to the ancient masters, prana is the mystical force that is found in all living physical entities, but which is non-physical. It is in air without being air. It is in water without being water. It is in food without being food. It can be experienced or felt, but it cannot be seen or heard. The ancients said that wherever there is life in the universe, there is prana, and that without prana, the universe would be dead, lifeless matter. Prana is believed to enter the human body in many ways, but mostly through breathing. The reason for this is that breathing is our primary form of energy exchange with the environment. For example, we can go for weeks without food and days without water, but only a few minutes without air. Breath is literally life, and life is but a series of breaths. From our first breath until our dying gasp, we inhale tremendous volumes of air. This air is a vast, diverse sample of our planet's entire atmosphere, which mixes at its outer extremities with space itself. In fact, a popular exercise for advanced mathematics students is to prove that each breath of air we breathe contains a molecule of the air from Jesus Christ's final breath on earth. That was really, really an amazing thing to think about. And in fact, I was hearing on NPR a talk about space dust and how much space dust is on our vehicles and everywhere around us, and that we literally are breathing in this, dust from stars. So it's pretty phenomenal when you think about it. And in yoga, one path of yoga, there are 8 limbs, which include the physical, is the 3rd limb, and the 4th one is pranayama, which is breathing exercises. So ways of bringing this life force into our bodies in a more efficient kind of way, so that we can live more fully. And of course, the deeper purpose of yoga is to unite with this divine energy and to discover that divine presence within us. So breathing techniques are one way to do that. There's this very, very, very beautiful verse from the Upanishads, sacred text from India. Then God spoke, I am the breath of life, and I am the consciousness of man. Adore me and think of me as life and immortality. The breath of life is one. When we speak, life speaks. When we see, life sees. When we hear, life hears. When we think, life thinks. When we breathe, life breathes. So there are these moments in our lives when we can feel that God is breathing us, that we are not really breathing, that God is breathing us, and that life is living us. And focusing on the breath and bringing ourselves into that place can help us intentionally get to that place. And I had this experience at Osage Forest of Peace, which is in Oklahoma. I've probably talked about it before. It's where I met this person that I'm doing spiritual direction with. Really wonderful, amazing place. And I guess it was the last time that I was there, I met with my spiritual director, and I started having these experiences. Well, actually, at one point, I just had this overwhelming feeling of love for her, which happens sometimes with different people. I just, like, oh, I love you so much. But what was different this time is that something would happen where I would feel like something was kind of coming at me from behind, you know. So it wasn't really me saying this. It was like something inhabiting me or embodying me that was like, I love this person so much. And then in ensuing days, I felt this happening with other people. So instead of just this thing of like, oh, this person's so fond to me, and it means so much to me, this person means so much to me, they've done whatever for me, or they love me, or whatever. This was not like that. It was kind of randomly what happened, just this presence embodying me that was like, I love you so much. It was not necessarily people I knew that well or that I'd been involved with that much. And I spoke to my spiritual director about this, and she said, yes, that is love and life living you. It's not you. It's the presence of God, love, life, living you. And it was very, very powerful. And I don't feel it all the time now, so it was interesting to have this experience of that happening several times close together. So that is what this experience is. And we all have it at different moments. Sometimes it's going to be stronger than others. But what was different about this particular time with me is that I recognized in the moment that that was like not me. It was something else happening. And then this experience that I've had recently with taking these 3 breaths has really been, I've just noticed a very physical shifting happening in my cellular body when I take these breaths, of something changing and just obstacles being removed and all those layers of stuff that get in our way disappearing. And there's also this idea in yoga philosophy, again, that we are not separate from our environment. In the West, we tend to think our physical bodies end here with the skin. I'm a separate entity and not really intimately connected with other people, perhaps in an energetic way, but not in a physical way. But when you think about it, actually we're constantly exchanging with the environment. I'm constantly breathing you in. The cells that come off of your body are coming into my body. The breath that you exhale is coming into my body. And so in yoga philosophy, there's these different layers of the body that start. The first layer is actually the environment. And then we have our physical body, then we have our energetic body, and then there's the mental aspects, and then it goes deeper into conscious and subconscious mind. And then what's beyond that is the divine. So, or within that, contained within it. So, and all of these layers are fluid. There's not a clear delineation between each one, but in fact, the environment is viewed as part of me, not separate from me. So every time we sweat or anything, anytime we are exhaling or anything, when we're expelling something, it is going into all of you, and vice versa. When we eat food, when we eliminate food, likewise, we're taking in the environment, constantly making this exchange with the environment. And so in that way, we can see a much clearer kind of connection with everybody and with all energy. So it's very interesting to look at those things. Another person that I like to read is Wayne Teasdale. Are you familiar with him? He wrote a book that's over on the table there called The Mystic Heart, which I'll refer to later, and also this book, A Monk in the World. So he was a monk and has really gone deeply into these aspects of where is consciousness and how do we connect with God. And he talks about something called spiration. So it's taking the in out of inspiration. And I wanted to read this little passage here. He says that spiration is the act of breathing in which the Spirit often manifests itself and communicates itself. And he talks about his first experience with this. He says, my first experience of this communication of God's Spirit occurred in 1982 when I was praying early one morning in the monastic chapel of my monastery. As I sat, I was suddenly seized by an urgent perception of a spirating or breathing presence all around me. It filled the whole space of the chapel and beyond. It was all-encompassing, surrounding me. It had the rhythm, cadence of the ocean with its measured ebb and flow, while also always resting in itself. As I became completely absorbed in the divine spiration, I realized that the divine Spirit was breathing me into existence. So just like that first, very beginning chapters of the Bible, and life being breathed into man. Existence was arising from its perpetual act of spiration. My own act of breathing, my own breath, was borrowed from its perfect breathing in and out. We all share in that eternal spiration of the Spirit. So it's a very beautiful thought, this idea of breath coming into us and how it connects us with all of nature. I also had an experience when I was working to overcome being nervous. I actually used to be a super nervous performer. I couldn't get up in front of anybody without just shaking, and you can't play the fiddle for sure when you're like this. You know, it doesn't work. So, and I was trained in the classical tradition where everything is about perfection. And I guess it was about 15 years ago, I came back to the States from being overseas and started listening to a lot of folk music and just decided to get more into folk music. And then I really, really wanted to learn how to get over being nervous. So I decided I was going to dedicate myself to that task. And I talked to a lot of different people. I tried a lot of different things. But primarily, the more I worked in this, and it was great to take up folk music at that time because folk music is way more forgiving than classical. You make a mistake, it's like, whatever, just play the next note, slide up into it, you know. Sounds scratchy, cool, that's part of the deal, you know. So it was fun to get into folk music. And also I took up the guitar, which was not my primary instrument. So I didn't have a bunch of expectations of myself. I wasn't a guitar player. So if I couldn't do it well, so what? So that was also very helpful. But the more I worked with it, the more I came to see that actually the problem was ego. If you're not worried about what people are thinking, you're not going to be nervous. That's what I came to see. So in essence, what I was looking for was a way to release myself from ego. How could I be released from ego so that I could become this instrument of something else? An instrument of creation, an instrument of God, an instrument of peace, and there's that beautiful prayer, right? To let me be an instrument of thy peace. So this reminded me of that time when I was seeking a way, and I still often do this before a performance. I will pray, release me from ego, because I can still go there. I can still be thinking, oh, you know, what is this person going to think, or that person going to think, or, you know, is this going to land me a Grammy? No, not really. So, you know, if I don't do this right, I'll fail forever. So I just pray to be released and let this be the most beautiful gift I can offer, and let this not be about me, but about the breath of God, about the breath of creation. So there's this beautiful, actually, creation story is kind of explored in this book, which I've referenced before, The Hidden Gospel. And I wanted to share a little bit of that with you, kind of relating this breath to this creation story. The old Hebrew word for human being in Genesis is Adam, which refers to a non-gendered being made up of dam, D-A-M, which is juice, wine, sap, or essence, which is assimilated or expressed so Adam. The letter Aleph, which points to sacred unity. And we talked about that before, that in fact the Aramaic word for God was alaha, which means unity. The word for wine or juice also symbolizes individual consciousness, which much of Middle Eastern sacred literature sees as distilled or fermented from sacred unity. And I don't know if you know this, but you know alcohol, they call spirits, like cognac and those things that are really concentrated, because supposedly they hold the essence of the alcohol. According to this view of Genesis, we as human beings have been given the challenge to hold within ourselves the consciousness of all older life forms as well as the entire universe, manifest and unmanifest. Similarly, when Genesis talks about human beings as created in the image of the divine, the Hebrew text uses the word Betsalem, which can also mean a projection of unity, a veil over the sacred that reveals its general outline, or a shadow of the totality of the being that is both one and many, and represented by the breath. When John 1 refers to the light shining in the darkness, again Aramaic forms are used similar to those in the Hebrew of Genesis 1:2-4, where darkness was upon the face of the deep, and then light burst forth. One could experience this process returning to the primeval beginning, entering the darkness and bringing light, not simply as a mythic story, but also in one's own awareness through breath. So it's pretty amazing to think about what just focusing on the breath can do for us. And then it goes on in this, he goes on to talk about this really beautiful passage from John. So in the King James Version, all it says is God is a spirit. But this Aramaic translation brings life into it. It says, God is breath. All that breathes resides in the only being, in this alaha. From my breath to the air we share, to the wind that blows around the planet, sacred unity inspires all. So again, that word inspiration is there. The Aramaic word for spirit can also mean breath, and parallels the Hebrew of Genesis 1:2, when the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. This can also be seen as the breath of God. These clues show us that Jesus advocated that we recreate the creation story within ourselves, returning to the primordial darkness from which the light first arose, using our own spirit breath as the vehicle. So this goes back to thinking again about those layers, the koshas, the layers of the body, breathing in and out. There's another beautiful passage, which we know as, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That sounds very odd. You know, what is this about being poor in spirit, and how is that blessed? So here's an interesting translation from the Aramaic. Ripe are those who reside in breath. To them belongs the reign of unity. Blessed are those who realize that breath is their first and last possession. Theirs is the I can, the creativity of the cosmos. So that poor in spirit is actually just recognizing that this breath is elemental. It's all I have. It's all I really have is this breath, which in fact is everything, because it's the essence of the divine. So the whole passage takes on a very, very different meaning in that way. So in both the Hebrew and the Aramaic, they use one word to express spirit, wind, air, and breath. So those are all interchangeable in a certain kind of way. When we translate to English, what happened is that for each circumstance, a certain one of those words was selected. But in fact, if you were listening to Jesus speaking in Aramaic, all of those ideas, spirit, wind, air, and breath, would come up every time this word ruha is the word in Aramaic. And the Hebrew word is very similar. It's ruach. So all of those things would come up each time instead of just one. So things become much kind of more vast and are understood in a very different kind of way when you read it in that way. And I want to read that passage again. Ripe are those who reside in breath. To them belongs the reign of unity. Blessed are those who realize that breath is their first and last possession. Theirs is the I can of the cosmos. So I'd like to close here with this beautiful rendering of Matthew 12:31. Wherefore I say unto you, all manner of sin and blasphemy shall be forgiven to men, but the blasphemy against the Holy Ghost shall not be forgiven unto man. I'm going to read that in the Aramaic, and it has a very, very, very different rendering in the Aramaic. Because in fact, what this is saying, and I'll probably the next time I come talk about this a little bit more, but what it's saying actually is that if you separate yourself from breath, everything can be fixed and forgiven and returned to balance unless you separate yourself from breath. If you separate yourself from this essence, from this breath, then God can't do the work that God is meant to do. There's no healing if we are separated from the sacred. So it's not that it's wrong necessarily. It just means you can't be healed if you're separated from this source of creation. So, and it happens to us all the time. And in fact, in our Western civilization, we hardly even breathe, right? We're just like barely breathing. And we're certainly not recognizing in our breathing that we're connected to everybody and everything. We all live in this isolated little world, and our egos are very active, and it's all about me and what can I do and what can I gain and how am I going to be injured, et cetera, et cetera. Instead of having this much higher consciousness that, in fact, everything I do is affecting everybody else. And that I am connected in a very, very deep way to everything that's happening in the world. I am not separated from God. I'm not separated from you. And with consciousness in the breath, and I think this is why it's such a prevalent thing in the Eastern traditions that we focus on breath, because it brings us back into connection with everything, everybody, all of creation, and the sacred. So this idea that this is this great sin is only because, and sin just means it actually to miss the mark, to be off balance and out of connection. So when we do this thing of separating ourselves so entirely from the sacred, then there is no healing that's possible. So I want to close now with the Aramaic of this passage. All types of tangled behavior, the missing and the falling, the rips and tears, all the ways you cut yourself off, break your connection, or disrupt the pattern, can and will be mended. Sooner or later, you will be freed from error, your mistakes embraced with emptiness, your arrhythmic action returned to the original beat. But your state cannot be mended or repaired when you cut yourself off from the source of all rhythm, the inhaling, the exhaling of all air, wind, and atmosphere, seen and unseen, the holy breath. So let's experience this for ourselves a little bit as we move into meditation.